deep, dark forest, an individual blessed by higher powers goes hunting for a monster that threatens the very consistency and state and preservation of the world. What am I referring to? Well, we'll get to that. Now, you've made it no secret to me that you are of a certain murderous variety. The type that likes to go in there, no cares given, just shoots everything, destroys it, and seeing as the best way forward. Now, I cannot fault your ideas entirely, as they are effective in certain situations. One needs to care little about a bunch of evil zombies, for example. However, blind fanaticism to go destroy everything that isn't you doesn't work well long term. And so today I shall discuss a group to you that, in my humble opinion, could be considered your kind's greatest allies, the werewolves. Or as some like to call them, the Garou, some the Forsaken, others the, oh god, why did DeviantArt get away with this? But either way, regardless of what you call them, they are interesting. Now, one may think, when thinking of a werewolf, a berserk predator that simply changes under the light of a full moon, murdering everything in sight with little care. If one is feeling a bit more sympathetic, they might view them as a tortured individual, one who was cursed by either fate, bloodline, or bite to become the savage beast, that the best thing that could ever happen to them is a swift and painless death. Both of these interpretations are not wrong in all cases, and they, even in the case I'm going to majorly discuss today, they hurl a kernel of truth. Werewolves are indeed, or at least the ones we're talking about today, savage predators, granted incredible strength and ferocity, and they are in many ways unmatched when it comes to certain techniques, at least if one looks at the normal inhabitants of our nightly underbelly of the world. However, they are a bit more complicated than that. Note, I did make a reference in the beginning that I think alludes to this. Now, as far as we can tell, the Garou, or werewolves I refer to them today, are indeed chosen by bloodline, or what I mean by that is genetics. Simply put, if your father was a werewolf and your mother was a human, there's a decent chance that you could be a werewolf, or maybe a part wolf, or kingfolk as they're sometimes called, or wolf-blooded, or whatever you wish to refer to them as. These people also have a chance of siring more werewolves, or just being normal humans. However, to boil down to genetics is a bit overselling it, as no confirmed werewolf gene, unless some of my colleagues are to be believed, has been found. However, that hasn't stopped individuals from trying or getting very far with it. However, that's a discussion for another time, probably. However, they are not simply mindless predators, like actual wolves. They do form packs. And like actual wolves, they are always incredibly stupid. They're capable of intelligence and cunning. And not just because a wolf is, by its nature, not a mindless predator. I do feel it's worth mentioning that a wolf and a dog have roughly the same intelligence and cunning level. It's just what they're focused on. However, the werewolves we're speaking of today have human intellect, at least some of the time. When they go into a full rage, well, that can go straight out the window. But when they aren't currently in the feast of one's guts, they are capable of conscious thought, intelligent action, and, most interestingly, forming groups and subgroups and organizations, as they refer to them as tribes for the most part. However, do not mistake these tribes for simply areas of geography or a slight difference in hunting tactic. Regardless of which tribe you face, that tribe will act in many ways completely differently. Yeah, you may expect a werewolf to charge at you when you walk into the deep dark forest, but are you expecting a werewolf to come out of your cell phone with metal skin wielding 2 submachine guns? Probably not. But depending on who you fight, that is an entire possibility. Or how about spirits that you can't see messing with you, making your life subtly harder? Or they could manipulate the world, similar to a vampire, in the sense of connections and destroying your bank accounts, or getting you in trouble with the law. You might not expect such cunning tactics from a predator that could very easily massacre most people in a 1v1 fight without much issue. However, they are capable of this. However, I do feel it's worth mentioning that the chances of a Garou 1v1ing you are significantly higher than a vampire. Just because they can play the cunning manipulator route doesn't mean they won't. Or doesn't mean they will, technically. But it's always something to keep in mind. They aren't always mindless predators. However, that is perhaps their most interesting, leads into the most interesting trait, in my opinion. They aren't just existing. Similar to you imbued, they have a purpose. They believe the world is falling to a corruption. Now, what this corruption is currently, well, as far as your kind is unknown. Some call it the worm, some call it the weaver, some call it the god machine, and some, even more interestingly, just call it death itself, or humanity. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is they are fighting with a much broader purpose in mind. At least most of them are. They are actively seeking to change the world in some fundamental way. This kind of should throw you guys off, as it rings awfully familiar. Especially that the werewolves themselves consider themselves to be chosen, regardless of genetics, by the moon, or Luna as they call her. That is a bit odd, isn't it? Does it not ring familiar to you? Higher powers blessing those individuals to fight darkness. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, then you clearly haven't been paying attention. There's a lot more connection between you imbued and the Garu than I think either group like to admit. In fact, some of the most heretical individuals will even go so far as to claim that perhaps they were meant to work together. Perhaps they were always supposed to. In an age gone by, they were the Solars and the Lunars, destined to work together to fix the world. Of course, that's all wishful thinking and probably the ravings of a madman. But then again, we do live in a world of darkness, so why not add a little madness? But, regardless of foregone prophecies or the end of the world, it is worth mentioning that many of them do have some ideas in mind that would help the world. I mean, after all, no one wants the rivers to be polluted, or all the animals to die, or we all to live in a totalitarian society where none of us have any free will. All of that sounds unpleasant. Now, they may go completely too far, or do very awful things, but a lot of you hunters also operate under the ends justify the means. So, is there really that much different? And yes, the werewolves have rage, but you imbued are also compelled to do what you do, to hunt down monsters, to save humanity. So, when I posed that question earlier, what was I referring to? Was I referring to a hunter or a werewolf? And is there really as significant a difference as you two would like to believe? Now, of course, there are other things I could go into. Werewolves are a supposedly very deeply spiritual people, said to go into places called the Umbra. But since I've yet to see you imbued be able to perform such a feat, at least on a significant level, I will not discuss that with you, for that is not of your concern. Others say they can go into the underworld or the afterlife, but once again, I've yet to see you two step through a portal and show me you can do that. However, all this is to say is that the werewolf is a much more complicated beast, not even made any easier by the fact that there are horrible versions of them who will do awful things. Those who are said to walk the spiral have some of the least humanity of any creature I've met in this world. And then there are other stranger beasts. Some say that not all werewolves, or Garu, necessarily change into wolves. I've heard reports of all kinds of things, from cats, to lions, to bears, to even dragons. So, all I can say is, keep an eye out when you're walking those moonlit nights, for you may very well have a fellow predator by your side. So always look out who each one of you is hunting. Yeah? Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscriber. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.